You got it from her.
Do you remember what his name is?
Yeah, what's the monkey's name?
Joseph.
That's really good. Great job.
Can I look at him?
Baby girl.
He's better now.
He's better now. Okay. What does he do? What's his primary function?
I just hit him in the table and he just...
You have
and
shoes,
Mommy
pink
just
shoes,
fixed it.
yes.
So she said, I can't mess with
My job is to hit him on the table.
No, I won't mess with his eyes anymore.
Okay, good job.
What? There's not.
I like the pumpkins.
Thanks.
I can tell you.
I put a lot of
So
thought
much.
into these pumpkins. So much thought
So
into
much
these
thought.
pumpkins.
Long time no see.
Yeah.
Is there coffee ready?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Ariel.
This
Hi,
is
Ariel. I'm Jody.
Hi Jody, nice to meet
Nice
you.
to meet you too.
Do you go here, right? Aren't
Yes.
you an elder?
Jody's one of our
Yes, okay, that's right.
Can I get a pie?
Do you want me to cook somewhere? Or do you want me to put
That matters.
Am I okay right here?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Daddy.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Wow.
I thought we were just gonna try to avoid that.
And what are his eyes closed?
He won't break when I hit him on my head.
Just the table?
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. See, go show you.
No.
Oh, here we go. It's like it's working now, but what if? What if?
No.
Oh, how are you?
Good.
I'm sure you figured that out yourself.
Excellent.
How about you?
I'm a little sleepy. But other than that, I'm good. It does kind of happen. Now that I'm getting up at 5, not just one day a week, which used to be on Friday, it's Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Because I work out on those 2 days.
You what on those 2 days?
Work out.
Oh, okay, so you work out and then the Bible study on Friday.
BSI hired a personal trainer.
Oh, did you?
So we got a personal trainer that works out with us in our fitness center. at
Oh, okay.
BSI. Yeah,
Cool.
that's pretty cool. Bentley, you know what you need now? Another one.
I didn't need number 1.
Okay. I'm just trying to get you to ask your parents for stuff.
Whatever.
Well, if you don't want stuff, that's fine. You know, stuff makes you happy, right? I'm kidding. It's not really true. He's like, oh, this guy.
This is a vlog. I stand in front of the drum.
Where did you fall?
I stand in front of the drum.
In front of the drums.
Yeah.
Were you playing drums?
No, I was still in front of the drum.
You're sitting in front of the drums.
Yeah, I was starting.
You were startled?
100%.
Yeah. I would be startled too.
But it's trying to sway.
Did you cry?
Yes.
Yeah.
And yes,
Yeah,
and
like,
I'm sitting here like you're
Yeah,
asleep.
but now it's
Stop.
some
Yeah, I don't understand. And you're in my closet.
It's
Right,
fine
exactly.
now.
Where it's
The
closed. I
Band-Aids?
took your batteries out.
Where's the Band-Aid? Oh no.
And it's still didn't work.
Oh, there she is.
She was.
She's stacking up the books. She likes to rearrange the books on the little.
She was excited to see
It's
me.
just her.
Was she?
And she's like, huh. But she's probably just excited to see
You
everybody.
probably have the blueberries that I was demanding from you last night.
What blueberries?
That's what she's probably saying. The blueberries that she was so mad, right? When she ate all of them.
About the
Yeah.
blueberries.
Well, she was mad at him too. She was like, "You better go get me some blueberries." Or
Laura,
Hi.
all is about to break
Haircut.
loose.
Hi, guys.
thank you.
Hi.
It was kind of a simple.
Delaney, you read Modern Reformation?
It's her husband's fault that we have
Good
this
stuff.
monkey thing.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Yeah.
I like to call it a blessing.
Yeah, that's what we'll call it.
As a blessing from the Stevens.
Chirping in my ear to wake me up in the
We've got
morning.
water and tea and coffee.
From the heavens.
But thank you.
I was expecting to be packed.
Okay,
I'm
Mama
only
said
on
she was done with that
episode
noise earlier.
Kiss Dating Goodbye one.
Okay, all right.
Mama said.
I had to take a break after that.
Yes.
You can listen to it.
I appreciate the every 2-week release schedule. Because it gives me about enough time to process what I've listened to.
Yeah, that was a big thing when I was in college and my early Christianity.
Yeah.
So I've had to like, wow, I love the faith.
Yep.
Let's go.
Okay, how's about you? My feet are
I
killing
feel
me.
like I'm like really far advanced.
This is supposed to help.
There's like the
I
preference
do, I'll
on.
send it to you.
Okay, cool.
Arch.
I've never eaten
Arch.
that.
Okay,
They
arch
get your
is-
arches
Okay,
In mine.
yeah, the orange
Should
basically
be wearing
is while
tennis
you're
shoes, but
cooking,
I
just
like
for
to wear
flavor.
dresses.
So
Yeah,
you
okay.
don't want juice.
With the dress.
Yeah.
You just leave them in there, I guess.
My mom, my
for
southern
some
mom,
time.
not.
Oh,
Now,
okay.
you used to take, so I fry them, you fry them or you just broil them with it?
I will broil them for like 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I
Caroline.
used to fry them with the juice, and
Oh,
let
really?
the juice like fry, but now I dump the
She's driving.
juice, and I just use some oil. and fry 'em.
Biking.
They're a little drier, but I think they're
Who's
better.
driving?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Dryer
Oh,
is
okay.
better?
I
I was
don't.
wondering, I was like, did she drive yet?
It
But
feels
no,
like
Jonathan drives
They were
now.
so
Unicycle.
juicy that they're
Okay.
maybe almost not really what you wanted from a carnita.
And she was saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
of course,
it-
of course.
I mean, the meat
Safety
itself
first, you
is
know.
juicy.
Oh,
Right,
Yeah.
So
right.
just pull it out of the juice
Right.
You've seen
and put it
Delaney's
in some oil.
lip.
Huh,
And then
okay.
fry it
Keeps
really
tripping
crisp
on
both
this, at
sides.
this spot. It actually happened a
Oh,
few
okay.
weeks ago
What
to
kind of
everyone. But she
pork,
tripped at the babysitter's
Roast.
house. She's had it
Yeah.
in like
I've
almost the
only
exact
ever
same
used
spot twice. But it stinks and finally
Okay.
healed
Yeah.
up and then
Oh,
she
yeah.
did it yesterday,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll send
The
it to
baby
you.
seat
With
It's
I
cinnamon?
swear, I
I
watched
don't.
her.
It's
Like,
like-
I know you do. But
cumin,
Bentley like
Yeah.
confirmed
Oregano.
everything that she said. He was telling us all about it yesterday.
salt. and
Yeah.
That
pepper.
sounds too Italian.
So,
but
but
maybe
she
it's
has this,
okay.
yesterday was
It wasn't.
bad. It
I'll have
was
to look it up.
Okay.
like,
I don't remember what
I
it.
sound like I know what I'm
sorry,
talking
watch
about.
her.
I
She's
don't.
standing up on the chair.
I don't
She's
cook
pretty
that
good on
much.
those chairs. Like
Oh.
she'll get down pretty easily.
Well,
but
this
But
is
the
the-
instant pot does the cooking for me.
Yeah.
Well, that's true,
Yeah.
yeah. This stuff goes in the crock
Oh,
pot, so I'm all good.
Yeah.
to go.
Okay.
Come here.
Yeah, I guess you could do like a slow cooker option.
Yeah, oregano,
Crock pot.
a traditional crock pot, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oregano,
everybody.
cumin, olive oil,
But yeah, it
onion,
was like
garlic.
she couldn't like barely keep
jalapeno.
anything in her mouth. Like it
So
was,
it's a
yeah.
little
Let's
bit.
watch
Oh, okay.
this.
Orange cut in half and then the vegetable oil and that's pretty much it.
Really? How long do you cook it for?
10 hours.
10 hours? Wow. So you start like way in the morning. Oh no, you do it overnight.
No, I leave it 7.
You leave at 7 in the.
Yeah.
Come here, Lainey.
Yeah.
So by the time 5 hits, we're good
Come
to go.
here.
So I shred, let it cool,
What did
shred
Daddy
it,
do to
get
you?
some oil hot, and then brown
You're a
it
big
really
boy.
good on one side, flip it.
It's a pitiful face.
Oh.
And that's a fake cry.
Little
Totally a fake cry.
Yeah.
Such a
That's what
fake
we do
cry.
it for.
Yeah.
Yeah, with like
She's-
some kind of.
Please
cabbage
stop,
or
that
something,
hurts.
and then I do like
Don't do that.
salsa.
No. I said
And
stop.
it was literally
If you're not gonna
avocado,
listen, you need to leave the room.
lime, and onion.
Do not
And it
come
was
up
just one of those
again.
things like I
That
happened to have the ingredients for it.
Uh.
This is the best salsa ever.
You just got the chair.
I just kept up with
But-
it.
Get off the chair.
Guess I should go on for a time and get people
Oh.
that bagels.
I thought she was hitting him. Like, how dare you make me get off this chair? And I was like, oh, you started that, huh? But she was like, how dare you
Here's a
walk past
knife,
me without
and
picking
here's
me
the
up?
little things I chopped
I'm
up.
like, you know this. You are more culinary
Okay.
skilled than myself.
That's pretty funny.
It is. He's so silly.
Yeah, you can pet his hair. He likes to be pet. Remember, he closes his eyes and he gets all happy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he used to close his eyes.
yeah. Until you did something to them.
Oh, she got some paper in her hand. She's all happy now.
Ooh.
What is it?
Is this our famous Sweetwater shirt
Yeah.
from the Tales?
Yes.
Like Sweetwater where?
Sweetwater Sound is in Indiana.
Gonna
Hey, Bentley, leave a little.
Sweetwater, which is the rattlesnake.
Yeah.
You're grilling now,
Close
mine's
enough.
right.
Sweetwater's the name of a donut place up in Kalamazoo, Michigan. That's where-
Donuts,
No,
rattlesnakes.
this is where I bought all of our
Music,
sound
yeah.
equipment. We were talking at the booth about how I had bought so much stuff at Sweetwater. And they were like, do you want a free t-shirt? And I was like, yeah. And then, yeah, I do. Yeah, like, yeah, we were just talking. He was like, have you ever bought anything from us? I was like, actually, yeah, we just planted a church and we bought almost our entire system and then some instruments from you. So,
Yeah.
and they were like, and I gave them a compliment on our sales rep. And then he was like, yeah, you want a free t-shirt? And then later, Roger's sitting there with me, and I was like, look, they gave me a free t-shirt. And like, he didn't hear the whole spiel about why I got the free t-shirt. And then he walks over and he's like, can I get a free t-shirt? And the guy was like, sure. And gave it to him. I was like, what? No, I earned this free t-shirt.
I had to work for that.
Yeah.
Spend money.
Get away.
Like a $30,000
Right,
t-shirt.
t-shirt.
Free t-shirt.
No, only 20.
I know it's farther
Only
than
20.
that.
Only 20. Only 20,000.
I meant you read the Bible reading.
That's not too
If it
much.
was 19,
Okay,
no.
alright.
Right. But
So you're
20
just the
really
last
put it
couple,
over the
right?
edge.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I really wanted to listen. I wanted to make it to the Bobby Knight one because I'm a big fan.
Just saying,
Big Bobby Knight fan?
Good to go.
As a coach.
I know Rebecca and Michael.
And he came to my, he came
Oh,
to
no,
my
that's,
town
no, you're,
finish his,
me
to
too.
finish his career.
I'm an IU fan.
Hey, you.
Yeah.
So.
How are you?
How's it going?
It's going well.
I can come sit next to.
No one is gonna sit at the tables. I thought people, like, on Sunday mornings, the tables would fill up
Paul.
first. But
We sat so close to each other when I was very excited.
you don't
about
have
Aaron's
to.
worker.
I'll pull out more chairs. I was just,
We did. You
Totally.
were kind of like vibrating.
I was
Okay.
so excited.
No, I can sit over
no,
Jody.
no, I'll pull out more chairs.
Okay.
I took text this morning. I remembered that sermon you did at Arise about Judas.
Oh, yeah.
He did
Yeah.
that sermon.
I'm gonna know.
We'll make Matt sit on the table when he gets here. He's gonna be late.
Is that the owl thing that can scan around the room?
Yes.
Are we gonna be on camera?
You already are on camera.
Oh.
I think it spins around.
It does.
I think it
spins.
revolves, and so
Hi.
It follows
I
who
will
we're
take
making
that.
noise.
We can edit
It's really
edit
cool,
anything
actually.
you edit
It is
anything
really
you
cool.
don't
Somebody
like
donated it
having
for
said.
I just put
An
on
adult.
socks.
Yeah.
Oh no, I can't see that.
Okay.
Yeah, I got
And
there.
so she
I can't see that.
can like
Like,
hear
I
some
just
because
took
she
my
was
shoes off
cochlear
and put on
implant and everything,
socks.
but she.
This is what you
Like
can
it
see.
helps if she can tell who's talking.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's why they donated
It's
it.
like right on.
I think when
I don't think it's God's
we
will for
had
Sarah
COVID
to
in
come to St.
January,
Louis.
Yet.
using her base,
No,
that's
They
one of those
had
ideas,
a backup
and we were
order.
able to interact with us.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Cool.
It's pretty cool.
And I
Yeah.
mean, it's a great,
It's kind of creepy.
they're gonna have to renovate it.
Oh, so when you turn it on, it
Good.
cooks you. Which we didn't know. I thought Jacob made
Yeah,
that.
glad they were able to get that. Yeah, I say Sam.
Yeah.
Or Ross.
Okay. I really thought Jacob made it.
So, and
What?
The came on when you turned it on.
Yeah, I have to reevaluate my life now that my friend thinks I make owl noises
She
when I'm
doesn't
happy.
have tattoos like Daddy.
I don't know what that says about me. Nothing good, that's for sure.
so they're listing their house on Monday, but they've already got somebody to
Do it again. Okay.
to stop by on
Cool,
Saturday and
cool,
look
good.
at it, so.
I say ours that first weekend. I mean, that's all it took.
Well, buddy,
Yeah.
then you shouldn't have
Yeah,
gone on it.
this
because
lady goes
I
to
can
Becky's
only
church.
do
Maybe
She's
I
like,
could
"I
do
need a
water."
house." And Becky was just like, my son and daughter-in-law are listing theirs.
Yeah,
There's children.
cool,
They're blessings.
good. I was saying, I'm trying to see where our center, our kid
I know.
person is right here.
What's funny is this is coming from someone who decided to have four.
You're
You're just telling me.
I need help.
What do you need help with?
Just put a pin in that, okay?
We'll be back to talk about that.
We can talk about that. What? When there's not so many people around.
Oh, we'll
Talk about why that happens.
Him underwater and he won't work anymore. He'll like he actually will not work anymore. If you put him underwater. Yeah, it'll go away after you play with him for a while. Hey, why don't you go tell someone about what you took to school for show and tell? Tell Jake, I bet he's interested.
All
What
right.
did you take to school?
My phone says Caroline is here.
It was red day at school. What
It's
did
red
you
day.
take?
Did you take Elmo? Did you take?
You're supposed to wear red, and then you took a fun red toy.
It was a fire truck.
Oh, man.
A big fire
that's
truck. And when he
awesome.
came up
That's
in line, like all the kids turned around, like, look at the fire truck. And I was like, "Ooh,
Problems. My bad.
Fighting with the fire truck. Nice flex there, Kelsey.
It's kind of a big one too, like it's the fire truck.
Just filled out a bunch of Christmas lists.
I know.
That's right. That's right. Right.
Most of the kids had like these small action figures. I was like, yeah, I didn't get the assignment. Sorry. I looked for the first red thing, and then
It was the biggest one, so
Yeah,
of course I saw
yeah.
that first.
I found like 3 like red things. Well, I was actually surprised that he didn't take Spider-Man, but he was like, "There's too much blue." I was like, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised.
fair.
Yeah, he's been such a Spider-Man.
Yeah, he's a big,
yeah.
big Spider-Man kid.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go help wrangle the Velociraptor.
Right.
That's a good child.
Yeah. The other day, Bree said she was a Parasaurolophus.
It's my favorite dog.
How does that work?
Yeah.
Hey.
Well,
How's
Paras-
that going? Is that a real word?
Yeah, it's a dinosaur.
Oh.
What is
Yeah.
it called?
Parasaurolophus.
Parasaurolophus?
Yep.
Man, it sounds like I'm just putting words together.
Yeah, I think that's what they did. Yeah.
Parasaurolophus. Javen used
Yeah.
to know like all of that.
She loves Camp Cretaceous,
Oh, yes.
which is an animated show set in Jurassic World. And yeah, she and Judah both. He doesn't say dinosaur names yet, but they just say "rawr." Close enough. Yeah. He's got that down. We'll get to the names.
That's actually a really good show. Do you sit down and watch them?
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
mean they're on when we're doing stuff.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
They have a pretty
Yeah,
good
it seems pretty
storyline.
decent. Yeah.
Yeah, my kids have binged those. Pretty good.
Where is it on? What's it on?
I think it's Netflix.
Netflix.
No.
So I'm guessing children aren't getting eaten.
Detoxing.
No, they're just
That's fair.
running,
Right.
terrified
Oh.
for their lives.
Most of
Well,
them.
one
Most
kid,
of the
one
time,
kid,
yeah.
one kid.
Some
Oh,
nightmares.
geez.
Yeah. And then
That's
they're
a-
like, it's like, okay guys, it's time for bed. Can we watch something funny, please?
Yep.
Because that would stress me
Parents.
out.
It's pretty
right?
dramatic.
Parents of the year.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to bed. Okay. Guess we're not going to.
That's okay. The joke when Ben was younger was everything he learned he got from Mythbusters or The Simpsons.
Or The Simpsons. I said the Mythbusters. That'd be fine.
All of his references were Simpsons references or Mythbusters
Mythbusters.
references.
Oh my gosh, we would be best friends.
I was starting out.
Well,
with
he would
an
like,
18-year-old.
he would watch The Simpsons.
Say what?
and
Letting
come
my
to me and say,
18-year-old
"Dad,
watch
can we
adult
watch more
movies,
Ben
not
Rosenthal?"
adult movies.
Because
Yeah,
when
sure.
you
All the cultural ones.
there's so many
Yeah.
references.
I knew what you
They
meant.
are.
You know,
Oh yeah,
there was
they're,
stuff there about.
yeah, they're
I wanted
super
to
brilliant
just- I
in
love
how
the
they
Coen
like
Brothers.
weave all
Some
those
people-
cultural elements
Uh-huh.
in there.
I wanted to
And I didn't
research one,
notice
so
it
it's like,
until I got
what?
older and like started
Circle
collecting all
basketball.
the
Okay,
years.
yeah,
I'm like,
that's
oh,
pretty
look
classic.
at that, you know, like
Yeah.
John F. Kennedy is like Mayor Quimby and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's like
Right,
really
right.
weird, out of the
She
box
was
references.
like-
I'm
Yeah.
Where did you see that?
Yeah.
Oh, it's on Simpsons.
I know, like
Oh.
they're
Like,
brilliant.
alright.
That's why they've been around for
And then we
30
tried
plus years or
something
whatever
else.
it is,
Yeah.
you know. So
Still no?
it's-
Still,
Yeah,
no,
I-
she's like, I'm not interested.
We kind
in
of
it.
started watching
Mom.
more of them. And
Yeah.
the kids are like, can we watch some? And
Oh, we tried to watch Fight
We were never allowed to watch
Sorry,
it
what?
when we were kids,
Tried to
and
watch
so
Fight
Club.
we never did.
Oh, Fight Club,
Because
yeah.
I've
Yeah.
never seen it.
But I've heard like
Oh.
I've done really
We
good
had heard
things about
of
it.
it. We were
Yeah.
doing the IMDb,
No,
Yep,
it's
yep, just goes
yeah,
on the list,
They're
yeah.
really good.
and that one was horrifying.
How are you?
Horrendous.
Fight Club is fun.
You
How are you?
can't-
Sorry, I'm
I mean,
like-
just no, I mean, just
tracks
like the
happening
first
there.
time you see Fight
Do you want
Club,
me to
like I
Close
think it is
the door
pretty
to that,
overwhelming.
or what?
I assumed that after he realizes
Yeah,
we're
once-
not
yeah, you
actually
have
going
to
to
get
give
them.
in, then he'll stop.
Okay.
But if not, then yes.
Because it's like I left and it got loud.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, thanks for being here or for joining us online. This is, we're calling this Discussing the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast. I think most people know, everyone in here, but Ariel and I were texting about this podcast, and we said, hey, why don't we see if other people want to talk about it too, since a lot of people seem to be paying attention to this. So Ariel's at Rooftop, some of you are Rooftoppers, I'm obviously here to Rise, some of you are Risers, so we're here really just to kind of see where this conversation goes. Ariel and I met this week just to kind of talk about our experiences with the podcast, and we very quickly realized people are going to come at this from a lot of different angles, right? Maybe you know a lot about Mars Hill, maybe you attended a Mars Hill church, maybe you have some sort of background in church world, or maybe you just like listening to podcasts and you kind of stumbled onto this, or maybe your friend said, hey, you should listen to this podcast, and so you listened to the podcast and now you're here. Whatever the case may be, we really want to approach this conversation to learn from one another. We want to approach this with charity, right? There are a lot of issues about gender and leadership and sexuality and how the church works and what communication looks like, and all sorts of things all wrapped up into this conversation. So as we get started, just want to encourage you all, hey, we're here to learn from one another, we're here to be charitable, and hopefully, and at least for me, this is the beginning of this conversation. We're not going to cover all of the podcast tonight because it's not done, and so really this is the beginning of some sort of conversation, hopefully, where we can just kind of hear where we're at, and really maybe identify some things that you all might be interested in discussing moving forward. So that's enough for me. I'm going to turn it over to Ariel.
All right, so Jacob and I kind of talked about kind of just like a set and series of questions that maybe we kind of want to go through. Obviously, we're not going to go through them all tonight, but just to start, the first question is really basic. What drew or intrigued or interests you to listen to this podcast? Why did you feel compelled to listen to it? Were you just curious? So for me, it's basically I am a former pastor's kid. So I am very interested in church culture, how that intersects with our culture, what's happening, and also just, being a woman in general, how, what does this look like, going forward for women as well. I also knew someone who kind of went through the same experience of kind of having a falling out with the church and kind of had a front row seat to that. So that was a little bit challenging to go through. So that's my very basic, in a nutshell, need for wanting to listen to this. So I'm willing to listen to all of you. Whoever wants to jump in and talk, go for it.
So why'd you start listening?
Yeah.
I got the email from Jacob about it.
I started listening because the church that I worked at before Rooftop, there are some kind of, I don't want to throw them under the bus at all because I don't feel like that's necessary, but there are some interesting parallels between the lead pastor there, and I don't want to say that he's at all to the degree that Mark Driscoll is, but I know that he was someone that he kind of looked to for guidance and books that he read, and there are some interesting similarities, not so much in the like fire and brimstone and harshness of his words, but much more in the way that he structured his, like the way that leadership works around him. And so growing up in that and not seeing at first the problems with that, it's interesting, especially going from like a super Baptist church to a non-denominational church, like Rooftop. Like it was a very different like culture shock almost when I first got there. And so especially having worked there a little bit in a church that actually didn't welcome female staff very well, it was kind of a interesting balance. And so I see a lot of that in podcasts, so that's why I started listening. Yeah.
Blake actually mentioned it to us as elders, and we all kind of started listening to it together on parallel tracks. But I was well aware of Mars Hill at the time that they were coming up, because they were kind of coming up when we were coming up. Like a lot of the things that were happening was happening within this entire movement of young 20-year-old people that wanted to have a different church than their parents did. They wanted to make a difference. They wanted to change people. They wanted to do good in the world. And we started Rooftop and Mars Hill. Like a lot of we kind of grew up at the same time. Obviously, we made different choices and our churches changed differently. But I mean, that's a 20-year span. And I remember things like, you know, them talking about the Passion Conference in the rain. Like, I remember listening to that record. I remember, you know,
I was there.
like, that was us, you know, the Young Restless Reformed. Like, that's where we came from.
Yep.
And it's not like I don't feel like I'm outside watching. Like, I feel like I became the faith in that whole movement. And so it's and I knew what an event, I mean, we did a rooftop worship night based on a Driscoll book. Like, yeah, we were in it. So I wanted to go in and dig in deeper and figure out how it went the way that it went. And it's fascinating, but a lot of those things resonate with me just because of just the experience.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
totally, yeah, yeah.
And it was Who Do You Think You Are? That was the book.
I was gonna ask that question.
Yeah.
Was it in bold?
It was.
Was there any yelling?
Not at
Did the book
lunch tonight.
scream at you?
I was drawn to it for the same reason. I was part of a church plant out of college, or in college and then out of college. And we were very influenced by the Acts 39 movement, and passionate conferences. I lived in Austin, Texas, so I was right there when it started. I went to one day, big fan of John Piper. It just really shaped my view. And then I was a big fan of Mars Hill. I had a dear friend that went there and was in seminary. And and just the fallout from her pain. I saw like just what that was like, and I just again was just curious and needed something to do while I cleaned the house.
I had no desire to listen to this podcast.
Thank you for your honesty.
Yeah, no, I didn't know anything about Mars Hill. I didn't know anything about this guy. I also tend to not like when people say you should listen to something over and over and over. So my plan was honestly not to listen to it, but one of my friends did it to me. I guess they did it
Too
enough
much.
where I started listening to it. He wanted someone to talk to about it, so. But yeah, it was very interesting, especially like just not having any understanding of what that was and what was going on at that time. So yeah, it was definitely eye-opening.
I'm in the exact same boat. I had no idea about any of this, and Rebecca was like, you need to listen to this. And I was like, okay. And then she would sell it to someone else. I need to make Michael listen to this. And I was like, I'm not going to listen to it after you said that. And then I did listen to it, and I was like, okay, this is informative. I should listen.
The church that Haley and I met at was a not an Acts 29 church, not a Mars Hill spinoff or anything like that, because it was much older than that. But we really tried to embrace and follow Mars Hill in a lot of ways, in terms of leadership culture, in terms of the way programming went, the conferences that we sent staff to, the college group that Haley and I spent 3 years in. That's what we do for college group, is we'd gather around, we'd watch a Mars Hill sermon, or we would listen to a Mars Hill podcast. I mean, that's what we did, and we'd talk about it. And I've never been young, restless, and reformed theologically. So there was, we'll talk about why RR in a minute. But so there's always this antagonistic attitude on my part in many ways towards Mars Hill, but it was the air we were breathing. It was how we did church. And in the years since, there have been moments when I have had to reflect on my leadership, or the way I do something, and I've come to realize this is just kind of this is the culture I was shown how to do these things in, and so this is how I do these things, not realizing kind of where those ideas came from. And so just coming to awareness of why we do certain things the way we do was really, really interested in this. And then I had a friend who gave some sort of indication online that he had been interviewed for this podcast, so I was all keyed up and ready to listen to it. As a church historian, this is always why the things that happen to churches is always interesting to me. So I was very excited about that, and continue to be excited about that, but also just feel like I need to cry and repent and take a shower after I listen to every episode show. So lots of reasons for listening to this podcast.
I'm kind of like Sheila. Jacob sent out an email and I started listening to it. And at a former church where we attended, we did have people come in from Acts 29 and talk about their setup and everything. And so we did look into it. We didn't go anywhere with it, but it was intriguing in a way, and yet there are pitfalls that we could see.
Yeah.
I like podcasts. I like knowing about the Christian at large, and especially in the United States. Jacob had mentioned this. I had like multiple social media people I follow talking about this, and so it was easy. I listen to a lot of podcasts anyway, so it was easy to add to the mix.
Yeah.
First Christian podcast, I had to listen with headphones though, because my kids were around. It was like,
Yeah.
Smart. I think he does give kind of, sometimes
Yeah.
he will
He does a
give
pretty good job, yeah.
Yeah. But
May not want to listen to this,
you
but
I don't want my
know
children to
not
hear this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, fair warning for anyone watching online, you may not want to have your kids watch this too, since disclaimer,
A
yeah.
very late disclaimer.
We marked this video not made for kids on YouTube.
So, coming into this podcast, what did you already know kind of about like Mars Hill or Acts 29 or anything else, or Mark Driscoll? I think you kind of hinted that you were like in there, and so that's why this was kind of like really personal for you. But was there anything that you had already known, like coming in, that you might thought that they would talk about or mention?
I mean, I knew how it dissolved
Yeah.
to a
Okay.
degree.
Mhm.
I knew that they were, they approached him, and rather than be restored, he quit.
Mhm.
I thought that was interesting, and the fact that literally overnight, the whole thing fell apart.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
though that was, I mean, because we were aware of what was happening, we were aware of how it ended.
Mhm.
But I don't know if anybody at the time really dived in. I mean, it's interesting, there was a very vocal online community of people that were like, Mark, you need to figure this out. Mark, you need to come to, Mark, you need, I mean, they still are doing that, right?
Yes,
Like,
yeah,
there's
they
a
are.
very
Yeah.
vocal group of people that are calling him to what they consider need to be repentance.
Mhm.
And he is calling that same group of people out to get him. I mean,
Mhm.
those are the two,
Yeah.
if you do two sides of the story,
Yeah.
right? Like they were trying to take control,
Mhm.
he was trying to do God's work, right? And if he wasn't
Yeah.
gonna let them do it there, he was gonna go do it somewhere else.
Right.
So those things I was all aware of those things at the time.
Mhm.
It's just that you didn't get all of the, this was the opportunity to maybe delve into. Well, you could say delve into both sides, but there is only one side, right? Like his side is not represented.
Right.
I don't know if it will be. It's only represented by what he's saying, right? His own recorded words.
Right.
Right.
But right now, it's not represented by him currently speaking about
And I
it.
think they're trying to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Casper is trying to get
Yeah.
a hold of Driscoll, but so far no success.
Correct. So I
I'd
don't
be
necessarily
surprised
want
if
to.
there would be.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
necessarily want to say both sides because it kind of doesn't always feel that way.
Right.
Except for you hear him in the moment,
Right.
and you hear everybody else with hindsight being able to talk about it later,
Yeah.
which doesn't always feel super like even.
Mhm. Yeah.
But that's, I don't know, I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question.
No,
at all,
that's
but
fine.
that was
No,
kind of what
that's
we were
totally
aware
fine.
of.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So a lot of the previous experience I mentioned, but to tack on what you're saying, like as things started to go wrong at Mars Hill, I started following a blog. I think this is the best name for a blog ever, about what was going on, and it was called Drisky Business. And just so one of
now I'm gonna be up all night.
one of the, I don't know if Drisky Business is still around. I have no idea.
I hope so.
I really hope so, but it was just kind of tracking what was going on at Mars Hill, and like pointing people to like, hey, this elder published this, or this X member has said that. It was just one of those kind of trying to put all the pieces together sorts of resources.
Lots and lots of writing.
Yes.
It is very interesting that people just like did kind of just like come together and start like making all these observations and writing all of these things. It just shows like how big of an impact this guy totally had.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, my jaw, I guess, I don't remember which episode it was, but my jaw went to the floor when I found out he was the leader of like over 60 elders, or 6 states.
Mhm.
There were like 100 elders or more.
I feel like it was over 100.
It was
Yeah.
something like that, yeah.
And they were all, it just seemed like a very big mess.
One guy over 100 is
One guy over,
that is not wise. That is not wise.
not even close. And I never knew that side. That was definitely not talked about in the general public at the time. Right? Did anybody know that?
I mean, if you were, like, I knew that back in the day. So, like, if you were in church leadership circles and you were interested in something like that, I think it was publicly available knowledge. You could have found it on the website or something like that. But it wasn't anything that was talked about much, was my perception, at least.
Yeah.
So what were your initial thoughts, feelings, expectations, whatever, when you first started listening, and how have they changed, like, if at all?
It made me sad.
Yeah.
There was such potential.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. We talk about how Mark is just like, this aggressive, bullying narcissist, but, given in like a right context, he could be a very persuasive and charismatic person. Yeah. Made me sad too.
And I think, especially in the early episodes, I think some of the more recent episodes have gotten away from this a little bit more. Not that Mike Cosper has intentionally gone that way or anything, but just loved people and like impacted people and changed their lives.
Yeah.
People stayed at his house.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like there is great love for Mars Hill and for Mark Driscoll, by especially the folks who were there at the beginning.
He had a very pastoral attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah, in persona.
And a
Yes.
team.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like they all were in it together.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that I would not want to do is think of this as twiddling his, mustache at the very beginning,
Right.
saying, "This is how I'm going to ruin
Yeah.
all these lives."
Exactly.
Because I
Yeah.
really don't think that that's how
I think-
it was. That
Yeah.
was the intention behind what started.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think he began to believe his own press.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
everyone was building him up, and he began to elevate himself.
Sure.
I think that's the saddest thing about it, about I'm only 7 episodes in now, something like that. And, but just from like what I know of it, and I was pretty young still when a lot of this was happening, but also like doing a lot more in the church, so starting to understand more of like the things that were happening, and it was a conversation at the Rock too. But I think the saddest thing is like when you're looking, and you guys kind of touched on this too, like there was real change in people's lives because of the things that were happening there. Like people were baptized, people came to know the Lord, like, and like there's plenty of examples I think so far in the podcast that talks about like what a great pastor he was and the way that he like wanted life to change. But I think it's a really scary, especially just as I'm not the lead church planter, but like as a church planter, like this is a really scary thing of like what can happen when pride takes over, when pride and thinking that like you can do things now without God, and when you have this sudden fear that like you're going to be pushed to the background, and kind of letting Satan sow those lies of discord. And
Yeah.
then more than anything, when you don't reach out to people and discuss that kind of pride, like
Yeah.
that's I think that's the scariest thing, is a lot of the things that were happening. Like if he would have had people around him that he was genuinely listening to, that were genuinely like where he was open and honest about his issues with pride. But then again, it kind of sounds like he didn't recognize it either
Yeah.
in some ways.
Or the dangerous thing too is to think that the way that you're going is like Jesus.
Mhm.
Is like, this is what actually like scripture says, you know, maybe I should be yelling at people, I should be bullying people, or maybe I don't think I'm doing that because, you know, this is what scripture
Yes,
says I
yeah.
should do, you know what I'm saying? So it could be rooted in that as well, like he just, I mean, I don't know, you know.
I also think there's a certain amount of ignoring, and granted, like the times kind of speak to this too, ignoring mental illness, right? Like
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I think there's a lot
Yeah.
of, it wasn't really acknowledged. Like I actually feel like mental illness is fairly new in church world, as far as like people acknowledging it and recognizing the need for even church leaders to pay attention to their mental state.
One of the things is, when you talk about how you started listening to it and how that changed, was hearing over and over, and what I would always hear in all churches that were doing well was, we are in the city, right? We are the hope of the city. We are the light of the, we are the city on a hill. We are that, like, if you want to make change, you got to get with us, and this is the only way. And that
Very church-centric.
very us, and almost like there's no opportunity even to reach out to any other Jesus folk in the community, because if they're not on board with what you're doing, then they're wrong.
Yeah.
And if they're not doing it the way that you're doing it,
Right.
they're also wrong.
Right.
And that was and the other thing that happens is churches that came up at the same time they did and didn't have the popularity, I feel like to some degree there's this, you gotta be careful, you're not like, haha, you know.
Right.
Now I know why God kept us small, is because,
Right.
you know, he was saving us. It's like, well, we didn't feel that way when we weren't growing, right?
Yes.
And now we're like, oh, we're blessed that God saved us from getting so big and being super famous. You know, because we all wanted that because we thought that that was gonna reach the most people. Does that make sense?
It does. And in some sense that is true. Like bigger churches on some point do kind of like, you know, reach more people. But also how do you, and that's one of my questions too, which if I'm not reading them in order, is how do you remedy the fact that so much good like came out of such a toxic environment? Like, can I still call the people who are baptized and are following Jesus today? That's still good. Like, they're still out there doing good in the world. And so, I think for me, it was hard to be like, yes, there's good, but this is like really bad. Like, it came out of something really bad. Like, how does good fruit come out of such a bad, you know, bundle of fruit, I guess? So,
Well, that's part of like the tagline of the podcast too. That,
It
like,
is,
God
yes.
working even
Yes.
amidst all this
Mhm.
crap that he's going
Right.
through, like when he introduces it every week. But I mean, I was like, Jacob, the Young Wrestlers Forum, like, I'm just gonna be honest, most of that's very repulsive to me, and not the theology as much as the attitudes of many of them, including Mark Driscoll, but the attitudes that and even now some of the pastors, and how brash they can be. It's very repulsive. So I went in like, and I actually sympathized more hearing the pastoral things about Mark Driscoll, and also like the change in him from like being someone in the very beginning to being like, you said that he didn't want to follow his leaders, Kelsey, but in the beginning, he seems like he does.
Yeah,
right.
And he has an elder
Yeah,
team that he works with,
Yeah.
and that he seems, and he even like preaches that, he teaches other people that this is the way to do church, is with elders. But then by the end, he wants to like be the CEO,
Yeah.
he doesn't want them.
Yeah, and not to say that he didn't start with that. I do
Right, no, but I mean,
recognize that, but
that-
that's just like when pride takes over, that's, you
Well, and then
decided that
ultimately,
everyone's
it's like
against you.
the corruption of power that's not, the church is not immune to corruption of what power does to people. I mean, that's part of it, is how it, when you're that famous and you're that young and that brash, how the power just makes you.
So I was listening to a podcast today called Cultivated, which is actually produced by Casper as well, and they had, I forget his name, they had a pastor on, but he wrote a book on narcissism, and Casper asked the question, why do you think that so many narcissists just statistically are like drawn to this pastoral role. And he says, well, you're speaking for God, and there's something like that's so passionate, and there's something that's so passionate and powerful about that. Like, you get to be a representative for God, you get to be up there every day, and
Who
you
doesn't
just
want to be
don't.
God?
You just want to be, and like on some days, like we are like little gods, like according to Genesis, we are to reflect His image, but we do it very poorly. And so it's interesting that you brought that up, because that is one of the things that this guy found. I forget his name, I'm so sorry. That he found when he was writing his book was that ultimately, on some kind of psychological spectrum, I think in narcissism you have pastors who fall into that spectrum, into that narcissistic spectrum. And
So check the growth.
yes, it is. What was his book that he wrote? Was it
When Narcissism Comes to Church? Yeah.
Yes. It's very fascinating.
Someone mentioned I can't remember who, but all the bad that was baked in. I didn't think you maybe mentioned, like, to some degree, in every single
Yes,
ministry,
sure.
there is bad,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And
Because
because we're people, and we're bad, and we sin, and we have a sinful nature, and we tend to be terrible to each other, which is interesting, because if we have 100 of us, the bad is 100-person level.
Yep.
If we have 14,000 of us, then that bad seems so much worse,
Right.
but not necessarily. Like, it's kind of indicative of our problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I'm not writing that off to any degree, but to some degree, there is this sin issue that we all have and we all need. And I think what happens is some people feel like they don't need it so much.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I don't need forgiveness as much because of I'm speaking for God, and and so there must not be anything wrong with me. And then that kind of perpetrates itself and starts to feel like, oh, this is way worse than any other church.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if it necessarily was.
Right.
Does that ring a bell?
Oh, no.
Well, I
Yeah.
wouldn't be talking about
Yeah.
if it was a 250-person church that went through this.
Yeah.
Right, we wouldn't be,
Right.
it wouldn't be a podcast.
It wouldn't be
about
as prominent.
Although, I think part of Cosper's point is we should be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Because it's
Right.
us.
Because it's
Yeah.
still
And
us.
still
Yeah.
have personal responsibility.
Yeah, whether it's a
Yeah.
We all have personalities.
whether it's a
We're all
25,000
on a
person church.
spectrum
Yeah.
of sin.
Heather Glessner says, weighing in online here, she says, I was just astounded that this could happen. It made me remember how vigilant we need to be as a church community to be sure that we're always questioning and examining our motives. It also made me think about how thin the line is between church and cult.
Yeah.
There?
That's funny.
And then Tiffany said, I related to the spiritual abuse for sure and the style of leadership that was placed in Mars Hill as well. So, more food for thought there.
Yes.
And for me, listening to the podcast, not having much information on it, kind of hearing a little bit right before I started listening to it. So not knowing timelines and such, I thought in my head, I kind of went in thinking of it as like checks and balances, like he didn't have anybody who held him accountable. Like, I just thought that was like, in my head, that's what I came in thinking, like, elders didn't do what they were supposed to do, all hell broke loose type thing.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, kind of the brand and how it does get dangerous when it's this person is the church, and then I know they were saying that a lot, which makes a lot of sense. Like, it was just kind of that perfect storm of, a little bit of social media that was going in there, and he was kind of getting the tips before they were starting. I was like, hey, you should do this, you guys should do this, you guys should do this, and so he, they did it, and so he's the one guy who's starting all these new things with social media and cameras and podcasts and all this stuff, and it kind of just brewed like this perfect storm that kind of just boosted him. So that's why, I agree to that extent. Like, it probably wasn't like that from the beginning. Like, it's kind of just, you get on this roller coaster and you start going.
Yeah, you start feeding the
You can't really get off.
Yeah, that episode, the brand episode, was just fascinating to me.
Yeah, that was the one, yeah.
So much there.
Yeah.
While it was all happening, they're all high-fiving each other.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
This is fantastic.
And-
And everything
and-
great that's happening.
Like, the fact that they had 3 red cameras
Right.
at that specific, like, before NBC had 1, like,
Yes.
blows my mind.
Right.
He was
How
like, yeah, we told him we wanna
bleeding
get this
edge
and
they
get that,
were
like,
for some of this stuff.
It
Yeah.
was
in the
interesting
studio,
to me.
okay.
There was a guy that they used, I can't think of his name, but the guy who was like very vocal in helping him like start up this brand. And it was fascinating to me to like how he didn't really recognize that anything was wrong, didn't really recognize anything was wrong until he made one comment about, you know, you're a pastor, why are they like, what's this? And he like, what a big deal I am. Like that was suddenly like,
Oh yeah, he would tell people.
oh dear God, what have we done?
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
kind of this scary moment of like, what have we enabled? Like, what have we put into motion?
Yep.
I was like, oh, it would be so terrifying.
Yeah.
Or the fact that they were talking about how many of the people like apologized for being a part of it. And I think that's really sad because this didn't start as something bad. Like it didn't like, you weren't this was done with a heart, like you were trying to serve the Lord and people were still reached. And so I think it's sad that there are so many people from that church that live in guilt for being a part of something like that.
Yes.
That episode was fascinating.
And to me, it reiterated something, you know, just in terms of what does this mean for us? Like, especially in new church plant world, there's this like, you gotta innovate, you gotta be cutting edge on something, right? Like, if you can get in the door before other people do, like that can be your way to reach people that aren't being reached by other things. And all of that is fine and good. But kind of what I thought about with that in regards to the Mars Hill stuff was what I like to call the Jurassic Park paradox, and that is just because you can do something doesn't mean you should.
Is it permissible?
Right.
Yeah.
And
Everything is, yeah.
peek behind the leadership curtain here at Rise, this is a question we are always asking ourselves because there are things we've done and had to do pandemic-wise, right? Hey, you gotta do church online, right? We're having this conversation, right? On YouTube right now too, right? Who would have done that 3 years ago, right? I don't think this piece of technology in the middle of the room existed 3 years ago, right? Just because we can do something, should we, right? Like that's a question that I think we can all be asking about what we're doing, but especially in church world, I feel like that's a question that wasn't asked a whole lot here. But yeah, food for thought.
So let me ask, especially for pastors and elders, how do you think that Arise and Rooftop particularly try to stay away from doing this, from branding themselves, or branding ourselves? Or do? Or do
It depends on what you mean by the word brand.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
doing what, you know, Mars Hill did, you know, like
Branding
making
the lead
podcasts and, yes, yeah, like making them a celebrity, or, you know,
think-
like even putting signs and posters and stuff, that can be counted as like marketing and stuff, you know?
I think
And
that's
just having, I'm so sorry.
no, go ahead. I want to hear your question. I
No,
thought you were
and,
done.
you know, obviously like having a doctrine and stuff is important, but is that, you know, like part of the brand as well, or is that just part of, you know, setting your beliefs and making sure that people know these are the things we believe in, and you know, having a mission statement is also important too, but two, you see this with businesses, you know, like Home Depot, let's grow something together, let's build something together, whatever it is, sorry, Greg. But, you
It's
know,
one
they
of those
have-
great
they have-
This company is the
they have
Mars
the
Hill.
histories and the philosophy and stuff like that, and so like, where's the line? What do you guys think?
I think if I was just going to like put something out there right now, there's not one person that is the brand of Arise. Like we are a
Yeah.
church that is planted, and actually our faces are probably the ones least seen on our social media and stuff like that, outside of like the fact that sometimes Mary only takes pictures of us or something like that. But most of the time, like we try to make sure that we're using other things. But I think, I think marketing is important to a certain degree. Like we were actually just having this discussion that like social media is our biggest, actually for our Rise is our biggest, that's the way that we've brought the most people.
Biggest
in,
awareness
is
tool,
by
yeah.
social media.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that was a thing before COVID. I think it's even more of a thing now because of COVID.
Right.
And so there is a certain amount of importance of like having like a branded logo and having things that fall within like the way that you want things to look and the way that you want to market things. But I personally think that the biggest part of all of it is making sure that there's no one person that becomes the brand
Like
of our
the
church.
face.
Yes.
Yeah.
Outside of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, has been our biggest, like, I don't know that was something that we intentionally decided to do, but I think it's something that,
Not just showing us on social media.
no, I don't think it's something that we like ever really thought that much about, like not just plastering your face on everything. Like your face isn't in the little sun on a rise.
There was thought given to that, yes. We want people to come to this church, not flee.
Yeah.
I can't not see
Just
that.
little Jacobs.
Oh my
You
God.
ever seen where like Shia LaBeouf is the whole picture? Like we should do that sometime.
Maybe the circle can have curly hair.
It gets longer as the year goes, yeah.
I think another thing that's helpful, and Rooftop does a better job of this because of where Rooftop is at, but that is not just having the guy preach every Sunday is actually pretty important, right? Like, I'm not going to church to hear Matt speak. I'm going to church, right? Because that's what I'm supposed to be doing this week. Now, here that's a little harder because we have one preaching pastor, but we try to, coerce our associates into preaching from time to time. But it's easier when you have multiple people at Rooftop. But even that, right? It's disappointing it's disappointing to his church when Stephen Furtick doesn't preach every week,
Right.
right?
Yes.
It's just par for the course at
Yeah.
Rooftop. So
Yes. Yeah.
there's a difference there.
We've been doing that long enough, I think we have created that. And we've also, I think Matt's very aware of that possibility, right? And he is on stage a very humble guy who's willing to tell you that he's, pardon my French, an idiot sometimes. Right?
Wow.
He'll be the first one to
Pull
tell
me
you.
over with that word.
He'll be the first one to tell you, right?
We'll bleep that on YouTube. It's okay.
He'll get me back to that. He bakes humility into when he speaks and when he preaches. And actually that humility, I think, is baked into the brand of Rooftop. It's like we're just kind of people trying to figure this out. Nobody's more famous or popular than anybody else. We definitely have people that have been doing it a long time, and I have a lot of respect for Matt and what he brings to the table, but he'll be the first to tell you, I'm a guy, I'm just a person.
Right.
And I don't know if Mark was very good at that.
He wasn't.
And
I mean, if you
I
listen,
wish he were,
There's no answer to that.
because I think a lot of these things could have been, a lot of this hurt could have been quelled if he was maybe just really who he was, unless he really was that. But it's so, I remember Nick and I have talked about this a lot too, Nick Spinolis. Sometimes I wonder if Mark Driscoll was played by Mark Driscoll. Like to some degree.
Yeah.
There
In a
may
movie,
have-
who would play you? What celebrity?
There
Me.
may have
Me.
been
Right.
Mark character,
100%.
Mark
Me by
Driscoll the person,
yep.
Yeah.
and then Mark Driscoll the pastor character.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
after a while, that character got he couldn't. It was untenable. Like he couldn't keep it up anymore, and it Scott.
He was preaching like 7 times or something.
Yeah, they said that there was
I
a
don't-
certain.
I don't know how that's
Seven
even
services a
possible.
weekend. Yep.
Yeah,
Wow.
I remember you reminded me of kind of look like, but I'm a big fan of the show Breaking Bad, and I wondered at what point
Remember putting the goatee
Mark
back?
Driscoll.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yep. No.
I have another friend that's bald and has a beard, and I call him Mr. White all the time. But like, it starts out in a really good premise, right? He's a man who's broken
Yes.
and
Right.
humbled and
Yeah.
So your picture
trying
is
to.
Halloween.
I'm so sorry.
Right.
But like, when did Mark Driscoll break bad? You know, like,
Yeah.
Right.
and then you see this like, oh, I'm trying to think of a word, but just grotesque. Well, it just shocked me when he was like, I feel released. God told me I can go. And it was like, I don't want to throw up right now
Right.
hearing
Right.
him say that.
Yeah.
Just taking no accountability and just a house of cards just folded.
And this is where I would say your theology does matter. I know some of you haven't listened to the demon hunting episode yet, but it is hard for me to listen to that episode and be like, how did this ever pass anyone's theological muster? Right? That's a theological red flag. That's a theological red flag for Sam Storms, who is more theologically charismatic than I could ever hope to be in the episode. And just kind of that influx of, here's who I am, this is my church, and this is what we're gonna do is something I think we really hope to avoid in as many circumstances as possible.
And Paul, to your point earlier, kind of connecting those, is that, yes, churches shouldn't say, oh, well, God didn't let us grow, so it was a blessing, but there's probably not any 25-year-old pastors that are immune to what happened to him if they did rise like Mars Hill did. Like, that's probably, I mean, obviously some of it was maybe his personality, other pastors might, but like anybody that rises at a young age to that kind of like level of influence and power is going to be impacted by it. Like, so that, yes, it maybe is not a blessing that you went through those struggles, but there is something to say for, and I think, I actually listened to the most recent episode when he's reconciling with this other, trying to reconcile with this other pastor from another church. And he even, there's a, I don't remember the quote, but it was basically that he wishes he had more time to develop effectively. Like he was even.
He was 50 when.
Right. Well, he was even
older or
Just,
whatever.
he was
Yeah.
older, much older.
But he was even reflective of that.
Yep.
Hey, I wish I would have not had this thrust upon me in such a so quickly. So I don't know. It just seems like at that such a well, to a large degree, their popularity. I mean, he was charismatic, but I mean, it's crazy how quickly they grew and how big it was.
It also speaks to the importance of the success of the church needing to not be just wrapped up in, like I said, that one individual. Because if it isn't just the one individual, you have people to share that success and responsibility with as you grow in that situation.
So somebody, I think Blake asked the question on Sunday, and I'm sorry if I'm asking a question.
No, please do.
Okay. Yes, if you could, would you, based on everything good that happened out of Mars Hill, if you could wipe it out and have it never have happened, would you choose to have it never have happened, any of it? Or would you, based on what actually came out of that church, the lives, whatever, you have to weigh the whole cost. You could press the button to wipe Mars Hill off the map. Would you do it?
That is a great hypothetical.
Is that unfair?
I think they're like, so like, to me, there's a lot of lessons. The biggest lesson, and this applies to, but it's like ethics 101, is the ends do not justify the means.
Right.
And I still think that's true in this case. I don't care how many people were saved or baptized, because all that we have in Christianity is the means. That is what we have, is the means, is how we live and act. And if we're not doing that, it doesn't matter. The results do matter, but it's not, I don't think that's in God's intended purpose. If we're not living like Christ, then I don't think that, not that God can't work through that. So, I don't know, that's a silly hypothetical in a lot of ways to say you'd wipe it all out. But, I think, again, all we have in Christianity is, the means. That's what we have to, we shouldn't care, we do have to care about the ends, but we should, that cannot be driving our, decide, which his elder team basically did. We are having these good results, so we're not, or we're going to protect him to protect the church because we're having these good results. Which I understand their heart in that. I don't think their intentions are poor, but I think that that's still I just think that's not appropriate.
Well, wasn't there one point, I don't remember which episode, where they knocked everybody's membership and had to rejoin
Yep.
and go
Multiple
through their
times.
classes?
Couple
A couple times. I can't fathom. But,
It's a rooftop today.
that's really,
Made everybody
We just
sign up.
changed the chant up for it.
Yeah,
I got grandfather.
yeah.
I should know what if I like the question. I I don't know if I like that question. I think I think
It's not a
just-
fair question.
It's not a
No,
fair
yeah,
question,
I
like, for
get it.
sure, yeah, it definitely isn't, because in that you're choosing to say, well, then these people can't be saved, and then you introduce the idea of like predestination, and then you get all muddy and theological, and I'm like, that is not the point of what's happening. The point is that we learn from the experience, you know, and God wiped out, you know, in Noah's story, everybody, and what happened? It didn't go very well, you know, everybody came back, you know, still the same.
Sin finds a
still
way.
well. Exactly,
Yeah.
sin finds a way, yeah. Nature finds a way. So, yeah.
Are you gonna explain what YRR is now?
Yeah, sorry. So that's a good segue.
Yeah.
Young Wrestlers from Reformed is a theological movement. I mean, you can trace the origins back reasonably far, but really kind of 80s, 90s. People like John Piper, Tim Keller kind of get the ball rolling, and then it really manifests with the Gospel Coalition in the mid-2000s.
Who was
So
founded by-
basically me,
I'm sorry.
and my
So
theology.
I actually think you guys might be Young Wrestlers from Reformed. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's this theological trajectory, folks who really kind of take classical Calvinism and try
Oh,
to
no, I'm just a 4.
really. If you know how many points you are as a Calvinist, you're Young Wrestlers from That's if that phrase makes sense to you, you're Young Wrestlers
I'm
from
only a T.
You can do the math.
Yeah. My favorite is John Piper. There are traditionally 5 points of Calvinism. John Piper, I believe, has said he's a 7-point Calvinist. I don't know how that works, but that's Young Wrestlers from Reformed. So, today, who would you say? I mean, like Jared Wilson is kind of one of the people who jumps to mind for me. But pretty much anyone who writes on the Gospel Coalition is kind
I
of
don't know who that is.
carrying this banner forward.
Yeah.
Which was, I think, established by Piper and Keller.
They were at least part of that, yeah.
uh-huh.
I don't even know what that is, but I do
It's a
know
blog.
that.
Yeah.
And hedonism, Christian hedonism.
Christian hedonism, yeah, that's a Young Wrestlers from Reformed idea. So people like James McDonald and Mark Driscoll kind of this was the theological banner that they really championed. So really emphasizing, in their case specifically, you know, strong leadership, predestination, sovereignty of God, sorts of things, and that's just kind of.
I am from a PCA background, so I have shifted a little bit, but,
Sure.
But yeah, okay.
Yep. So, and I use that term descriptively. It's not a pejorative term or anything
Okay.
like that. It's just a descriptive term.
Okay.
Driscoll wasn't initially reformed though, right? Didn't he go to seminary and kind of come out with like this very narrow-minded capital R reformed mindset?
You just described every seminarian's experience ever. But yes. That's why we go to seminary, yeah. To learn the capital T truth, and yeah.
The truth starts with an R.
Right. Yeah. Starts R-E-F, yeah. Yeah.
And it's rooted in C, not Christ, but Calvin.
Yep. That's very typical of
Yeah.
folks in the Young Restless Reform movement is they have this intellectual awakening to
Yes.
the truth of this particular view of scripture and tradition and doctrine,
fire.
and then you run from there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, Young Restless and Reformed to me is a descriptive term, like saying someone is charismatic, right? Or someone is Anglican, or someone is Catholic. It's just kind of a trans-denominational label that you can apply to folks.
Right, so I'll throw in another question. So where are you in this story, if anywhere? Are you a member, a pastor, a participant, elder, deacon, outsider, or just other? Do you find yourself in the Marsville story and what happened anywhere? Figuratively, not literally.
Well, some of us couldn't be there because we were female.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Half of us.
Can you ask the question again? I got a text while you were saying it.
Is distracted one of them?
Now, where are you in the story, if anywhere? have you had an experience like what happened at Mars Hill? Were you a member, pastor, participant, elder, deacon, outsider, or other? Which is kind of draws back to the question, like what kind of drew you in the first place?
I don't know, for me, in one of the earlier episodes, there was a soundbite from one of the people on their launch team. And as they were describing the reasons they joined Mars Hill whenever it was launching, that was something that grabbed me. I was like, oh, I'm in this role right now.
Yeah.
I need to think about what I'm doing.
Right, exactly.
That was the part that grabbed me.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, leadership, part of the leadership team, and I haven't, thank God, I haven't seen anything go awry. But rooftop leadership stuff has gone awry. Like,
Sure, yeah.
there have been damage done by two people, right? People that will come and tell you at one time or another that rooftop has done damage to them. And while I was on the leadership team. So that's something I have to deal with, right? I have to live with someone was hurt while I was served in leadership at a church that they attended and either no longer attend or still attend and are still hurt. That's just something I have to figure out how to deal with and how to live with and how to communicate with them and how to be open, and hopefully I'm not hopefully there's not a Paul podcast 10 years from now.
Rise and fall of Rooftop.
Well, I was trying to figure out what would the name of Rooftop's podcast be, and I still don't know. Maybe it hasn't been.
Rooftop wreckage.
Yeah. I was thinking like.
Your episode would be, there was this guy who looked like Walter.
I was actually thinking about Rooftop was a church. That would be the name of the podcast.
What is that?
Where do they know?
Men for Jesus. Yeah, there you go.
All right. So that's I see. Yeah, that's where I see myself as having to reconcile with there's people that are probably like that jerk Paul blank blank blank, and hope to God they've said that to my face because that's a church thing, right? Like wanting to have those conversations. If you've ever been part of anyone that was hurt, you want them to talk to you about it. You want to know where Now I do. I don't know. Maybe it didn't sound like Mark always did.
Yeah.
But I hope that I would want to know that.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, what's his secretary or something that was brought in, and she said something like, Mark needs to have like more men behind him or something like that. He fired her for it.
Yeah.
Accused of heresy.
Yeah.
Heresy.
Heresy trial.
Yes.
That was beyond.
A lot of trials in Mars Hill.
Yes. That is a forever conference.
It's a really good question. I keep hoping that he'll say yes to participate. Because the whole time I'm like trying to wrestle with, okay, he's still created in God's image. I want to know.
You're hoping Mark will participate. Yeah, okay.
He's still creating God's image. He's still influencing Christians.
Yeah. Yes.
And how complicated, and this is something to bring up, but what happened with Darren Patrick, similar to like happened to Mars, where Darren flung himself into submission, and it did not go well.
Right.
And Mark had the exact opposite reaction. And it's not that it's going well, but he's alive.
Right.
And so I think about that. Like, there's, maybe God did release him. I don't know. I mean, we'll have that conversation in heaven. But I'm not empathizing. I think I wouldn't even have a voice in that church. I think I would be hurting for the people that were leaving because I would be attached to why are so many people leaving. Because I'm a highly sensitive person, and if someone in leadership is leaving, then I'm like, I need to leave, or whatever.
Right.
So.
I think it's just incredible how the church closed its doors so quickly, like from being like this mega church with thousands and tens of thousands of people to being done. Like it seems crazy. Like, I don't know, that's the celebrity cult pastor thing that I don't talk too much about, but I mean that's it's just so it's nuts.
He's on this continue. Yeah.
I think to answer your question,
Clarifying maybe you said that.
definitely leadership, being an elder.
Yeah.
I'm not the most charismatic or, super, I don't feel like I'm this, super intelligent guy, so I feel like working on not being persuaded as easily and kind of feeling my convictions if, there's things that I think need to be addressed and things like that, so that kind of made me think about that thought process more, being comfortable saying things maybe that I might hold off on, or maybe I'll wait till later, or maybe I'll have a private conversation, or whatever it may be, kind of just for the sake of whatever, trying to get it out and out in the open.
Do you have any questions or anything, or you just kind of, do you have any questions,
I mean,
anything you want to bring up before I?
My favorite
move on?
question to ask is, like, what's the moment that's got you in this story so far? Like, if you're like, there was a moment where I'm like, oh, this is something I need to think about.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
was it for you?
There's so many.
You can just take, the last episode. That's fine too. Yeah.
Something that you need to think about in your role, or something that you need to think about in there?
Just, this is more story based, right?
Oh, okay.
Like, when my kids are at home watching something on Netflix, right, and I'm doing stuff, I'll see something, I'm like, oh, I should pay attention to this, right? Like, what was that moment for you with this story?
Yeah.
And it could be recent, right? It could be early on, but like, the moment of your angst, or your inspiration, or your terror.
I was listening, it was early on in the podcast, and I was listening, and the band guy was talking about how he was playing during this worship moment. And they just kept going and going and going, and people were praying, and he looked up, and his daughter
Yes.
was there to get baptized.
Yeah.
And I was like, God, tears, I'm like, oh.
How is this podcast supposed to be done?
Right. And I'm like, I've had those super inspirational moments at Rooftop.
Yeah.
And to know that that guy who was at that church at that moment, his own daughter got baptized during everything was going on, and now all of that is over with, and all of that is done, and all he hears is the bad, and his church where that happened is just gone, it's closed. All of that is over with. It's just really sad. The inspiration and the God working in the way he did in the moment, being so high at one moment, and then 14 years later, however many years later, looking on it and have all that be gone, just is just these two highs, and does that make?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does.
And that to me is one of that was the moment that really hooked me, was like something is because you can't deny that God moment. Like if I were to be playing and worshiping and look up and my son's getting ready to get baptized because of something that was moving there at that moment, knowing that God was really active and moving, to know that that's either people want to negate that, or it's gone, or it just can't happen anymore because of people's actions. That's, I think, the one. Does that track with what you're asking for?
Perfect. Okay.
I think one of the things that showed so drastically how he had lost touch with reality in a way was when the camera, I can't remember his name.
The Jesse?
They were in Turkey,
Yeah.
and they had been filming and filming and filming,
Yeah.
and he, that's when he said, "Don't you know I'm kind of a big deal?"
Yes.
You hear that and you think,
Yeah. It's terrifying.
yeah.
Yeah. For a pastor. I mean, for anybody.
For anybody.
For anybody. Obviously, to think that they're.
Unless you are joking when you say that, that is a terrifying thing to hear
That
from
is
someone's
terrifying.
mouth.
If he had let them stay at the water park or wherever he was, instead of sticking him in a
Right.
little hotel
Right.
room where they have to edit, and then he comes the next day and says, okay, what am I supposed to do? Kind of a-
Yes, yeah, treated himself like a celebrity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the episode where Joshua Harris
Yeah, I
was
was thinking about that
instructed.
too. Mhm.
I'm in a place now where a lot of my friends in our generation that we grew up with in church are deconstructing
Yeah.
and leaving the faith,
Mhm.
or trying to waffle about, okay, this guy who had a great influence on my marriage, you know.
Yep.
That's exactly, I think I was 19 when I read that book, and I'm like, yes, that's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
And I did, and I've been married for 23 years, but it's been 23 really hard years. It was not what that book leaves out. A really big part of the
That's
chapter.
not what sells.
That's not what sells. And so that episode has me sad, because I'm just, a lot of my friends, I come from a PCA church in Webster, and people are just, you know, not going anywhere. I'm glad we found Rooftop. It's definitely not Kelly and Lori. I think my husband might wear jeans to church now. I you know, we were wool slacks. You know, he was like the opposite of Matt. I can remember Kelly going,
It's amazing how God changes people.
yeah. Who, Matt or Kelly? Hey, Matt wouldn't know about the Bible Project apparently if Kelly hadn't told him. So,
Yeah.
you
There you
know.
go.
Yeah.
We've all won because of that, so
Yeah.
that's good.
But yeah, I just, that whole episode just broke my heart. I find myself reeling in that part of the story.
I think the things we do to women, was pretty difficult to listen to as well. And some of the, and Jake and I were talking about this, some of the pushback that Cosper has gotten was that complementarian churches are just wrong, and complementarianism is bad, and egalitarian is the only way to go. And I'm like, that's a wide spectrum. Like, there's extremists over here and extremists over there, and it's like, I know people who go to complementarian churches, and it can be a very good thing, you know, when it's done healthily and, you know, in a good structure, but this was not. Like, this was clearly something else. It was not even like complementarianism. Complementarianism was like complete just like bullying, and this is what women are supposed to do, and this is what men are supposed to do, with very little room for discussion, and just, it was just very icky feeling to listen to. For
Well,
sure.
to be fair, like, egalitarian churches are not immune to.
Right, and that's why I
You
said
just
that
gotta
there's,
look, you
yes.
have to look at,
Yeah.
Willows.
and that's why I said like
in
there's an
Chicago,
extreme there.
Bill
Yeah.
Hybels.
Bill Hybels.
Yeah.
Yes.
You don't
Oh,
have to go
yeah.
far to find
Yes,
problems in churches,
right,
so.
right.
I like a both, you know, these days.
Mm-hmm. You know, yeah, it doesn't have to be one or,
I like a both fan in
Yeah.
this stage of my life.
yeah.
That might make me reform, I'm not sure.
Well, and I appreciate what you said to a degree. It was a unfair way to treat women and men.
No, absolutely.
Like this unattainable way you're supposed to live your life
Mhm.
that no one can attain.
Right.
And as I just ponder over this over and over again, the lack of grace that seemed to be
Yeah,
was unbelievable to me.
like the shutting the door when they had the men's meeting, they shut the door, they're like, you're late, too bad.
Right.
Yeah, you better step it up.
And
Well,
it's
and
the
just
lack
the
of
way
the
that-
understanding of God's grace.
Yeah, yeah.
That if you're not a man like this, then
Right.
you can't be here. It's like,
Right.
that's not what God says.
Right.
God called me, I was a sinner, and he called me his friend, and I've been born again, and
Right.
I've been redeemed, and it's Christ in me, and it's not
Right.
myself anymore. It's literally Jesus living in me.
And
Like,
we're supposed to do the same.
and none of that seemed
Yeah.
to be really be a thing. It's like,
Well, the way they shunned like the elders that they fired, like those
Yeah.
guys, like the
Oh,
way
yeah,
they just
you
like
couldn't-
shunned their families, like it's unbelievable that
Yeah.
that like happened.
There's bodies behind the bus.
Yeah, it's
That's
just
what
like,
he
yeah.
said,
Yeah.
yeah. And there's
Yeah.
a whole mountain.
That
And I
whole
was like,
speech.
Is this a church?
Yeah.
What is this?
Yeah, I think
That's
the
murder.
you just ran those people
They
over.
say don't do that. And there'll be many more. And I'm like, but why?
I think the burner count is what got me.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, William Wallace.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what. Yeah, I was like.
Oh,
And
in
then
the
the
days
people
of
like
the
responded
BBSs,
to it, and
yeah.
like it was all. But it's weird how he did it. And I can like when you're talking about it, I can almost get where they're coming from. Like, oh, they just thought he was like doing this so he could respond to it, and like it like almost made sense at the time. It's like it's so weird because in a way, like I guess I could kind of see that. It's just so crazy. And kind of to Paul's point before, like hindsight, everything's different when you.
Well, at the time, he's calling people to take responsibility.
Right, it's
for their
just
lives.
so
It doesn't
weird.
seem like a bad thing.
No,
Taking
but is he
responsibility.
doing it the right
Right,
way?
right,
yeah.
You know, is he doing it with grace? And even saying like, I've fallen, like I've been there, and kind of encouraging people over, finger pointing instead, so. There were, oh, sorry.
Oh, just like he was saying, like the Dr. Jekyll, Mr.
Yeah.
Hyde thing, like, it was kind of like that vibe, like, oh, he's just kind of doing this play on words, and it's just, that's what really.
I think they were in the same episode too. But there were 2 points. One's more directed at him, and one's more directed at the people, not necessarily the people around him, but the things that were kind of particularly jarring to me. One, when he was like yelling, like the soundbite that we hear like during the "Hi, come in."
How dare you?
Yes, like when we were hearing, like finally getting to hear what the soundbite is from. And then he was talking about how like that was very Holy Spirit led, and that was something that I hadn't even planned. And then like they basically proved that wasn't true, and that was kind of like, that's such a strange thing to lie about. Like when the Holy Spirit's leading you to do something, like why would you? I don't know. Yeah, like why? Or like if this wasn't Spirit led, like you're just a guy that really likes to take credit for everything you say. So like why aren't you taking credit for that? Yeah. And I feel like that's a weird way to like maybe stop like the Holy Spirit moving in you if you're going to lie like about, I don't know, that's kind of weird because I don't know that you can stop that, you don't really have that kind of power, but like I don't know, it was just a really strange thing to lie about. But then he was talking about the book that he got out of it, out of like this particular lesson, and then the people that like Andy Stanley, and who's the other name that they said, actually like endorsed, and it was kind of, and they said like, but like looking at this, like none of them agree with this, but he like checks all these boxes with doctrine, and that was kind of that's probably where I thought like, oh, like I have to think about this, just because like there are people that I like and people that I follow, like we have this tendency to try to trust people, especially people that we feel like have done well in the past. But like this is an example that those things can change. And so if we are not paying attention to the things that are being written and we're blindly following it because, it's been fine in the past, or like he checks these boxes, so these boxes are just ones that we're going to ignore.
Right.
That's particularly scary to me.
Yeah. Does the doctrine matter more than someone's character?
Yes.
Is definitely, the question.
That
should be asked.
Yeah. That was my like, oh my gosh, like how many things have there been that I've probably said like, yeah, it's probably great, you should go read it. I love this author. I'm sure it's a great book. Haven't read it yet. Yeah, and like that's a scary thing to think about.
Right. And then like, what are they right about?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are the points of the doctrine that are so important that it's okay for
That it's
him to
okay to
say
overlook-
such atrocious things?
Yeah, then it's okay to overlook their character.
Yeah.
Because like the doctrine actually should define like who we are, for sure. In a way. Yeah. What other questions do you have?
Any other moments for people who haven't said their moment? This is really the question I want to hear from
You want to re-ask the question for the late?
I told you.
You got an engagement. What was the question?
Involvement in the podcast, it's stuck with you. So, this is.
I'm sure you mentioned all mine.
What is it? Just give us one.
That's a wrap. That moment at the end of the brand, where they're over in, is it Turkey?
Yep.
Yeah.
And it all just kind of comes,
Yeah.
just becomes, as they're reading Revelation, it becomes just so obvious what's going on. That's a wrap.
Yeah.
It was a great podcast moment. It was a great moment in their understand. That and having visions of people having extramarital affairs. So
Yeah,
While in the pulpit. While in the pulpit.
Like it was a TV.
Like,
I know, yeah.
like I'm watching a TV.
The Lord has blessed me with this vision
But
of
was
you
there a
having
TV
sex
in
with
front of
somebody.
you?
Oh, no, it's
Like
just.
that word was really like, it was like a TV in front of him. Okay, wow.
Okay.
I'm thinking about, our HD, 4K TV, so.
Graphic.
Yeah.
Gotta bring down the resolution.
Surround sound.
Oh, man.
Wait, remind me of that, when he told that woman that thing, right? Was this at church? Or what was I thought it was like
that
during
she
the
in the car or
trial,
something with
wasn't
him?
it?
Yeah, it was something like that, yeah.
So he said, "This is what I know about you,"
Yes.
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And was that because he found out about it somehow?
Oh.
Like, was he right?
I don't know if
He
they,
I think
said
there
that-
are a couple different times this has happened.
Or was he just like being obnoxious?
And there were several times he said he was right.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know that they made it clear whether he was.
Or not.
yeah,
Okay.
they don't actually.
So they don't
There may have
say
been one that-
what
that
her
she said
reaction was other than, "I can't believe you're saying
Not
this."
that I can remember.
Okay, I was just
That
curious,
was
like,
2 episodes ago or something. Is that in the
Demon hunting,
one?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the lady they interviewed, like,
Yes.
her positive experience coming out of that is fascinating
It
to me.
is.
Like, that was a moment of freedom for her.
Right.
Even though now, in retrospect, she's like, yeah, that was crazy. Why on earth did I ever do that? Like, that is so, I don't know what to do with
Is that
that.
because God used it?
That's not how she framed it.
How does she frame it?
She framed it like she needed, needed.
She
something.
needed this
She
realization.
thought it was kind of off, but she's like, I needed the freeing more than caring if it was
Yeah.
actually the right way. Like
Yeah.
he like gave her an out, like he gave her a reason to.
I want to know how her life has changed now because of that.
Like, yeah.
What has happened? Like, it was so freeing for her then. Like, what is it like now?
Right.
Yeah. But she even said a couple of times, I thought she's like, I heard myself say legion or something
Right.
like that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. But it's somebody's experience, you can't necessarily lay down.
But
On
even that's
that
what she
all the
said.
time.
She was like, that was something that she heard.
Right, I don't know if it's
Like,
actually
I don't
in the
even
Bible.
think she
Yeah.
made it
Yeah,
sound
like,
like she
what-
thought it was silly,
so,
but
like,
she just did it.
Right, but that even happens like when police like question witnesses and
Yeah.
stuff. Like they don't remember necessarily what they see, or they depend on like what other people say or hear. So maybe she was kind of dependent on what she had known about like demon trials or something like that. I don't know. I'd be interested to see.
I think she kind of was like, she felt like there was a script to some extent to it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
That just comes from
And-
your knowledge of those situations.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You're like,
Yeah.
I have to say something.
Right. he's sitting right next to me. What do I do?
Who else really likes that intro song though? I've been like legit listening to this song.
I feel like it's too creepy to me now. I can't.
Yeah, now it's in context.
Yeah.
I can't listen to it.
You listen to it in real life and you're like, where's the screaming
Yeah.
guy?
I know, it's like, you expect me to yell that.
Well, I usually do, I do.
Oh, right, yes, of course.
How often did he
When you
preach like
listen to
that?
the song,
Like,
sometimes does someone clap too?
Did it
for
5
you?
times.
I give him a
Let's say,
phone out.
based on the sermons we've heard from him, like, yelling was pretty
Yeah,
common.
yes. The yelling pastor, the cursing pastor, I think.
And the cursing pastor.
Yes, was his, and that's cool.
Yeah, quick poll, who in here likes or is okay with it if your pastor swears from the pulpit?
Stairs?
You said likes it?
Swear.
It's okay, if you're like okay with it, like, if it's done well, like, who's like,
Stairs.
Stairs?
I'm gonna need a.
Swears. Swears.
who,
Now
like,
we got
three
a
of
word
you?
right.
That would be okay.
Define swear.
Not idiot, which is what Paul called you earlier.
Yeah, I told you.
But
You said that you would say that about
It was
yourself.
actually a compliment. It was about your ability. Yeah.
for words you wouldn't want your young child saying from the pulpit?
I think in one of Paul's letters, doesn't he use like dung or something? And wasn't that,
Skabala.
yeah, isn't that like,
Say that.
All right, so Ariel can talk herself into it. Anyone else?
no.
I wouldn't be.
You're okay with it?
I wouldn't fall out of my seat or anything.
I would survive, but I would have questions.
You have questions.
I would prefer less colorful.
Prefer less go.
But if there was a clip from a movie.
I think it would depend on the
Oh, okay.
context. Like if he's doing it to be cruel to someone, no,
Yeah.
absolutely not. If I mean,
If it was habitual.
yeah,
Maybe.
yeah.
For clarification, doesn't Cosper defend Driscoll here and say that Donald Miller was the one who gave him the reputation as the cursing pastor?
Yeah.
And Driscoll
Yes.
actually hasn't cussed that much,
Yeah.
but twice.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did say that,
Yeah. In the
Yeah.
actual pulpit.
That's
Yes.
good to
Right,
remember that.
yeah.
I'm just curious about perceptions. That was
Is there any connection between the seminary, Mars Hill, and Mars Hill, the church?
Name.
yeah.
Just the name.
And then
This-
there's the other Mars Hill too, right?
Like the actual hill in
No, the Mars Hill that
No,
has the-
Rob Bell. Rob
Was it
Bell's
that?
Rob
church.
Bell.
Is that-
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
so it was a common like notion back then
At the
of
time,
like, let's
yeah.
be smart Christians.
Right. That didn't work out great.
How's that working for you?
It's
like-
like,
it's
we
like
went
the-
the other route.
It's like the journey. Every big city has to have a journey
Yeah.
for a while. For a while, Mars Hill, or the crossing.
Yeah.
Called Mars Valley.
Yeah.
It's like it's
Did
like,
you have the same ring to
Our
it?
church plant was Three Rivers because there were 3 rivers.
Not to be confused with Twin
You knew where to go.
It was exactly it.
Going back to your question, I think I would be okay with it if it was appropriate, I guess, / merited, but I also have a difficult time coming up with that scenario where it would be appropriate.
I'll work on one for you, but okay.
So,
I said goddamn this one. It was appropriate. I want to believe it was.
Did you say G-O-D or H-O-T?
H-O-T.
Hot.
Hot damn.
Yeah.
No.
I didn't hear.
Hot damn!
My ear, like, what did you say?
God. Damn.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I would probably have a hard time with that one because that was like drilled into me as a kid. Like, don't take God's name in vain. And like, I would think, oh my gosh, he just took God's name in vain.
Yeah, I prepped people for it, and I mean, I gave them 3 seconds to leave.
That's enough.
As soon as they got
I mean, like, I wouldn't be like, I'm never going to that church again. I'd just probably be like, wow.
Yeah.
and that's part of the merited and the challenge with it is the repercussions, you know, and that's one of the things that they ran into at Marcel was the repercussions of how he was doing things.
Right.
Maybe he got the reputation because he was so vulgar in other areas and explicit in other areas that were inappropriate, in my opinion, that like degrading women and like saying that certain things should be done a certain way. And,
Sex from the pulpit?
yeah,
Yeah.
graphically.
Graphically.
Graphic.
That's the big
Yeah,
issue
that's-
there.
Like, I can't believe women stayed, and I would like just be like, walk out like that.
I'm sure there were probably some women who wanted to, but didn't feel like they could.
Yeah.
You know.
Probably call one.
There's also
Yeah.
probably women that were weighing the pros and cons, like they may have wanted their husband to step up more, and then he did, and they're like,
Right.
this is great. But
Right.
then they were like, well, now if we leave, is he going to regress? And
Right.
Yeah.
for in their mind, the greater good, they stayed.
Right.
Or they kind of viewed it as a package deal, you know, that I have to live with this to get that. Good stuff.
Yeah, I would have less problem with the pastor swearing in church than talking that vulgarly. And just thinking about it from a parenting perspective, because we've had to talk with our child about, you know, these are words that exist, but you only use them when you really need to and it's appropriate in the setting. And having a pastor, it's harder to explain away to a child, oh, just talking about these vulgar things is okay. It's okay for the child, for the pastor to be talking about that. Than a one-off of a pastor using a swear word, and then you can explain it to your child. Oh, it was needed because the pastor was talking about this subject and felt strongly.
Were there children in the audience when he was talking about that?
Oh, I
Oh,
guarantee
absolutely.
it,
Oh, yeah.
100%.
Oh, yeah.
What else do you have?
My next question is where do we go from here?
Meet again when it's over.
Okay.
I mean, I have like 40 other questions, but front of head, front of mind.
I like 7. So you
Go ahead, pick one.
No. What, yours was totally fine. I mean, the podcast isn't over, so how do we tell where we go?
So that's my question, is do we do what Lori said, do we meet again when this is over, right? This is just kind of an interim thing. Or is there enough here that people want to talk about that we can make this a semi-regular conversation as the podcast continues?
Do we know how long it's gonna be?
I think it's 12 episodes.
I think he said 12.
With some special bonus material?
I'm not sure.
Oh, so we're on 10, so there's only 2 left.
The Josh Harris one was extra.
Yeah, that was.
Oh, okay.
And the myth of how they started, that one.
The little short mini one,
It was,
yeah.
Yeah.
I listened to that while I was working out one day and I'm like, because it kind of changes depending on who
Yeah.
you wanted to hear it and what the
Yes.
audience was. And because what he just boiled it down into what started, Mary Grace started church, lead men.
Yeah.
It was with the 3 things.
Yep.
And
Yeah, it was like something with the Bible.
Yeah, is that,
Preach-
is this
teach
the
the
one?
Bible. Teach the Bible.
Yes, yeah.
Teach the Bible, make church.
Is this the one where it shows that this is the Bible that?
Yeah,
And everyone said,
yeah.
no, that's the ESV, it
it's
came
like
out 3 years
different
ago.
Bibles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't be a Bible from the Bible
It
story.
is.
Yeah. Which is funny because as that story and as that myth evolved and got broken down to these really sharp 4 things, so did he. Right? Like he started out messy and with a bunch of elders helping him and he, it was all over and as time went, he got really narrow too. And so did this mission statement.
Yeah.
Like his life, his teaching, what he would and would not tolerate, who he would and would not have around him, who he would and wouldn't listen to, got really narrow, and so did this little pithy, at the end of it, statement become.
Yep.
And it was interesting how his life got like that, and so did what he said God told him to do. Because he wouldn't tell you God told him to do that 20 years before.
Right.
So I always thought that was interesting.
What do you think about how we talk about the founding myth?
I just want to know his story I wonder what his story is, if he would ever be vulnerable enough to share what happened to him that brought his character to the point where it was at, like the lack of character, like what pain, or I just imagine that he had some dark things in his past that were not dealt with because he was a young pastor. How old was he when he started the church? Like 25. Who knows who they are at 25? And so I just wonder, like, what was behind the scenes.
No, I think the question that Cosper wants us to ask is why the church, as we have currently experienced it, makes it difficult for pastors like him to share his story.
Yes.
What is it about the world we live in, the church, Christian church we live in, that makes it difficult for that? And I mean, maybe lose members, maybe lose face, I don't know. But yeah, I'm curious about his story too.
I think there's a story there.
It's far more complicated than the street brawler thing that he wants to
Well,
convey.
he changed his story a little bit.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
He was a street brawler sometimes he was kind of a scrawny kid, right?
It's like he doesn't really know who he is, almost.
A lot of people are like that.
Or, to say a word in his defense, it's complex.
Yes.
Right,
Right.
it could be both.
Right.
It's both.
Yeah.
It's both. Sometimes he was this, sometimes he was that,
Right.
depending on who he's
That's
talking
true.
to.
Or he was playing both stories to see which one was received better, so
I
you
think
can brand
John
that and
Piper
go with
described
it.
him as complicated.
Yeah.
He just said, he's complicated character.
Which is how stories and memories work, right? It's hard to sum up your childhood in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Does anybody know the rooftop founding myth?
No. I'm new.
This is
Not sure what the.
This is more
Were there
like
magic stones?
The story of how we start, I mean, the idea would be the college kids.
Right.
Right, having a community, wanting to bring it back to the city that
Yep.
they were from, to see it be like they never experienced. Would you agree with that, Matt, to some degree?
That's what we say. It's complicated.
That's what the script I was given for
Right,
next
yeah.
steps.
But it gets boiled down for storytelling purposes, you know, but there's a lot of truth to that, yeah.
I wonder if that's, we're talking about the differences between Arise and Rooftop, and Mars Hill a little bit earlier, Matt.
With regards to branding.
With regards to branding. I wonder if, we don't, that's another difference, we don't have an origin myth like that, right? There's very little mythology baked into the ethos of the church.
I found myself over the course of listening to this. I mean, I don't tell about the origins of Rooftop very often, but this sort of reaffirmed. I mean, at least I don't from a personal perspective, because it's very personal. I mean, Rooftop there's a biographical background to it, but I don't want it to matter. I'd want Rooftop to be bigger than what Matt wanted to do. So, and this sort of reaffirmed that. Like, people may or may not need to know. My own, like, I was a scrawny kid too. But,
Were you a street brawler?
yes.
Successful one?
Don't do that right now, that means something.
I'm gonna
Successful street brawler?
message Greg and Brad, I'll be right back.
Yeah. Total street brawler.
I mean,
But
one thing we did talk about earlier, Matt, I mean, what do you, how, this is projecting, do you think you would have been able to handle success
No.
like that?
No, not at I was late because I was having a great conversation with a guy. We were talking about the journey, because we both have history with this organization, and just watching the journey implode and what happened to Darren. And I mean, the journey, you might not know this, but this is part of the Rooftop background. Like, Rooftop got started, it was going all right, the journey came in, Darren and I became buddies, then they just kind of did this, and we just kind of did this. And I spent 15 years just feeling jealous and envious of all their success. Meanwhile, knowing this is not going to end well. Yeah, and well, I can say that now, but there were warning signs the whole way. I mean, I knew Darren well enough to know he's a little bit of a prick. That sounds unkind, but there's some truth to it. But I, at the same time, while I experienced such jealousy and envy, like, oh my gosh, we're this podunk little church in Afton. That was never the vision. Paul, that was not the vision. The vision was.
I'm sorry.
Mr. President.
Why are you a street brawler?
Leadership, this is where we ended up.
When Paul got there, I'm like, now we're good. We got our Nolan Arnado.
Darren lived in my neighborhood
Yeah.
in Webster, and there's a Facebook page about Webster and Afton, and there's wanting to build a wall. I have no idea why, I'm a Texan, but apparently there's snooty people in Webster, and Afton's more real people or something, I don't know.
Yeah, there's.
I mean, I live in Afton, that's how I think of people from Webster.
I'm not snooty, you gotta come over.
But to finish the story, like, I knew, and as I was watching the journey take off, and losing touch with Darren because he was busy and too important to have.
Wouldn't take your calls.
Better not.
How big is this guy's church?
I realized as much as I kind of want that, A, I don't want the problems, and B, I wouldn't be able to handle it. I would have fallen into some terrible addiction or have some terrible, embarrassing affair. And so, God bless them, and thank you, Lord, for what He's given us. But I'm not sure how that fits into the. Were you talking about me before I was in?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There was nothing else.
Matt could never have.
You can watch what he said about you.
No, he said really sweet, I almost cried, there was a tear. He really spoke highly of you.
He did, yeah.
I'm sure.
Right after he called you.
But he said it's
So
an
gross.
idiot,
Don't
kind
do
way.
it.
Endearment. there's the relationship there where he said, pardon me for swearing, and then he said idiot. I was like, blow me away. Idiot, such a strong.
I do need to rewind this. Context.
Yeah.
Well, we were originally talking about it from the context of could anyone have, handled that situation, being put there at
Oh,
that
that's,
age.
yeah, thank you. That's good context. I doubt
We were
it.
skeptical.
Well, yeah, because the idea that someone could be super successful but also hold on to their integrity and humility, oof.
We don't like failing, but it's good for us in some areas.
Yeah.
If you handle it correctly.
Yeah, I mean, learn
Yeah,
first.
Bristol did not.
Yeah.
It can be good for us, yeah. But I do think of like Max Lucado,
Yeah.
Tim Keller.
Mm-hmm.
These seem to be the exceptions though, like for the most part.
I think of all the celebrity pastors in the past 40 years, you can maybe name 2.
Yeah, but then the bad ones get the headlines.
Sure.
You know.
Just like regular celebrities, like there are some people that are actually good. They're good people even in their celebrity-ness.
Well, they at
Their
least
famousness.
They seem to be.
They seem to be at least. But some people who really aren't.
And how many of them are made that way because of their celebrity, or how many of them were inclined to celebrityhood because of their charisma?
You think you could have handled it?
Heck no.
I don't think you could have handled it.
No.
We were church shopping in St. Louis. We went to a church where a man is, I guess he's up and coming in the city, and he had a speaker and he had a secretary, and you couldn't get to him without going through his secretary to speak to him. And I was like, that's weird. That's weird.
Sorry, please.
Yeah, that's just weird. Like it shouldn't.
That's
That's a warning sign. I wanted to say to him, sir. Hello over there.
Also deeply unpastoral.
No, he looked scared. He looked scared.
You just he gestured to me.
No, the guy, the pastor actually looked uncomfortable and shy and just not accessible, not past, yeah, it was like,
But
like the Oz, like the curtain in Oz.
in defense of that pastor that I don't know.
You don't know. You probably wouldn't.
Not everybody, I mean, it's hard being a pastor, and pastors are expected to have a wide variety of gifts that maybe they don't. Like, there are a lot of introverted pastors. The pastor draws introverts, and he might actually not. He might need to learn some people skills. He might need to be a better teacher.
If you don't have them, I feel like I've been a part of churches where pastors are criticized heavily for something that they're just not gifted with and they can't really help. And I agree.
Yeah.
I think that's a hard
And
thing to judge.
and scaling up gets problematic too.
Mhm.
Like, how do you handle that? I'm in that phase right now. I don't know how to do this. How do I remain connected with peeps while also doing everything else?
So question for, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, and like pastors, like they're not just like hearing the things that you're coming to them with. They're hearing like all of these people's things, and they're having to feel all of these things with all of the people who are coming to them. Where you're, having to feel yours and maybe some other people's, but they're having to feel everybody's, and I know that can take a toll because like I don't know half of the things that Jacob knows, and like it takes a toll just in general, and I know it takes a toll on pastors who actually care about people. So,
Can I ask a question for you? So one thing that you're pretty good at, even though you're like super introverted, is the ability to be around people a lot, like on Sundays, and hold conversations with people. Was that something that you were gifted with before? Was that like a learned skill?
So I'm perfectly balanced between I and E.
Okay.
And I can be what I need to be according. Oh, what?
It's an ambivert.
Is that an actual word?
It is.
Oh, I love
I'm
it.
an ambivert.
So I'm an ANTJ. Yeah, so I can be whatever I need to be according to the needs. But I know that that's not necessarily true for most pastors. Yeah, you guys. Are we really? Are we both ANTJs?
I'm an I.
She's an I.
INTJ.
But I think I can be pretty independent. I was just, when you said that, I was like,
It's
Matt
a new
and I were
term
really
for the
close on
Myers-Briggs
this.
people.
Yeah.
It's an ambivert.
I'm one of those guys that never took
No
the test
way.
and doesn't really know what you're talking
Well, it's
about.
Myers-Briggs.
We made it 107 minutes before the conversation led to Myers-Briggs. That's the record.
Roger was like, what is your
Don't-
percentage? Because he had like a
I'm
certain
not-
percentage
I'm
of
not,
both,
but
and
I'm
I was like,
saying,
oh, I was
we've
like
got 11
99% E. There was no I.
What do you guys think about the Enneagram? Sorry.
I thought we were gonna talk
Moving
about
on.
that. What would his Enneagram number be, Mark Driscoll? He would be an
An
8.
8. Yeah. Well, they said
Wow,
that.
that was
They did say
Yeah, it was on
Uh-oh.
there, yeah.
It's a real thing.
Eights, yeah. Really
No,
brash
8s are
and
awesome.
bold and, yeah, yeah. I don't like the Enneagram at all. The only reason I know that is because
They said it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
said it was
So the other thought, I mean, just, and I don't have an answer to this, is Mark Driscoll's obviously the focus of this, but so much of it is like, why do we, inclusively, why are we drawn to this celebrity pastor? Like, what, like, because we empower, like, we as Christians and Americans empower that. That doesn't really exist in most of the rest of the world. Now, that could be because of our culture, but I mean, I don't have an answer, but we empower that and allow it by being drawn to it. And so, what do we need to?
And not calling out sin,
Yeah.
too, yeah.
So it's like, what lessons can we learn and watch for in our own lives to not be part of that system? So I don't have an answer, just a question.
I think there are a lot of different facets, but I think it's just like wanting to be a part of something. You know, wanting to be a part of something big, wanting to, because so much of faith is just like not tangible. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't always feel God. I don't always get the goosebumps or whatever when I read the Bible and stuff like that. But like when I see somebody who is, you know, charismatic and open and funny and all of these things, you know, that embodies a celebrity, you just like kind of latch yourself onto that and you're like, I kind of want like what you have. Like I want to be able to like believe you and be with you, and despite my seemingly lack of spiritualness, you know, which feels so dry, like this person doesn't. And just, you know, like, yeah, just wanting to belong and wanting to be there and being attracted to, you know, intelligence or funny things, whatever it is, you know. I think it's different for everybody though. It's a good question.
Talking about that sense of belonging, I wonder if part of the reason we're drawn to the celebrity pastor, larger church type thing is because it feels better to belong to something that you can say, they're doing this big thing. Or we do a lot of things together and I can say we because I go there. Whereas, you know, the scale of what Arise is able to do is so much smaller, equally important. And, you know, you can contribute the same amount on a lot of things, but that we do this is appealing.
I think you can also remain anonymous
Yeah.
in a larger setting.
Yep.
And still belong. And still feel like
And
you're
still
there.
feel like
Yeah.
you've contributed.
Right.
They're very loud children.
They're having a good time.
I think they're watching
They're singing.
Oh my gosh, they're singing.
I got thrown off by the gym.
Oh,
In my
yeah.
head, it sounds like they're yelling in the gym, but then I realize it's because I'm listening to their use. Like it sounds
All
like they're
day.
just yelling in the gym.
All day.
Whatever song you're listening to, or they're throwing basketballs against the wall. Yep.
Aw.
Hashtag church planter problem.
Next to a gym.
All right, any preferences on where we go from here?
I wouldn't mind reconvening after this series is done.
Yeah, if it's only
If
two.
it's only 12.
Yeah, if it's only 2 more episodes, yeah, might as well.
Was that the 10th episode?
Oh, no, there's
The
3 more
Monday Night
episodes.
Problem?
There's 3 more episodes.
I thought there
it
were
was-
10, but I didn't realize that one of them was like a one-off
Like
kind
a
of
bonus?
thing. Yeah.
So I think there's 3 more.
Nick and I were
Stuff on
talking
the
about
bonus.
like, there'll be 3 more, and then there'll be like 6 more, and then 10 more, and then Mike, there'll
And
be
one more
well,
thing.
there'll be a discussing the rise and fall of the rise and fall of.
Right.
It'll be so popular, Mike Oscar will be like the podcaster.
I
And
know.
then he'll like irreparably damage
like,
everyone that he knows, and then we'll have to talk about the podcast.
Well, it'll be a big deal.
You got Cosper.
Like I keep imagining, is Mark, because if he is a
Conception.
narcissist, is he listening? Is he listening? Will he choose to listen to the
Yeah, that's a
podcast?
good. Everybody's wondering.
And I wonder, like I keep thinking, like, okay, and his church members are listening, and this is all happening in live time, and like, it's connected and messy and weird, and
They even said they're having more people come up and say, hey, do you want to hear from us? And they're like, yes, so it
And
may
his,
grow.
and his current church?
That's what I want to know about, like what's
Yeah.
going on in his
No.
current
Yeah.
church.
That's what I want to
There's-
know,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's definitely some stuff going on there. Yeah.
Are you like, how do you know?
I'm trying to read about it and go online.
Like, is it,
and stuff.
because I was, like, where do I look for the inside
It's
scoop on this
It's
church?
Trinity something.
It is
It's this
big too,
church.
right? It's a
Yeah.
big church.
It's pretty
Yeah.
good sized,
Yeah.
yeah.
They're,
In
they're,
Arizona.
There's
Scottsdale.
still a group
Scottsdale,
of
yeah.
ex-Trinity people that have their
Uh-huh.
own
Yeah.
writings.
Really?
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
don't, I feel kind of gossipy caring about that, but I'm really curious.
So CT, I don't know if you saw this, but CT did some kind of cover on that, like when is it gossip and when is it
That's right.
helpful? You know, and I don't remember much.
It was like
it
2 months ago, yeah.
Yeah, it was
I skipped
something
that
like that.
article, it didn't look interesting.
Well,
but
you
now-
They said it's gossipy when people stop watching it.
And the Holy Spirit's coming back.
Yeah, it was appropriate to my question, but there was something else to do.
So meeting after we're done.
All right.
So this was episode 9 though.
Yeah, I think there are 12, this is episode 9.
Yeah, 3 more episodes.
so that's like 6 more weeks from now.
Ish.
Yes.
Until we get the bonus 13th episode where Mark Driscoll talks.
I'm hoping that he talks, but I'm
I
very
really hope he
skeptical.
does.
He doesn't even mention Mars Hill on his bio.
I find it incredibly
not
hard to
there.
believe he will, but I still hope he does.
If it's
For
not
the sake
there
of
now.
kingdom and him.
Let's pray that he does.
Yeah.
Just be a guy
Right.
who's
I mean,
complicated.
To your point earlier, right, like some of this sounds one-sided without hearing his voice.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
But his contemporary voice.
There are parts of it I'm like, I think I'm done listening to this, because it feels like just this giant pile at some point.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear him speak about it.
That's why I know we're winding down, but I thought the best episode so far, aside from the brand, which I think was just awesome, was like the first episode.
Yes.
Because the question that they start off with was who killed Mars Hill, and his answer was absolutely true. We all did. And I think I think he's kind of lost that, which I think needs to be the point of the
I think
series.
he's going to come back.
I hope so.
Yeah, I think
Because
he's
you're right,
gonna
it feels like a big dog pile
Yeah.
since then. And I've sort of like,
I did.
You don't
Yeah,
feel like there's time.
in getting topical, I definitely feel that. Like, man, we are just really hammering him right here on this. But
Yeah.
at least as he frames it and ends it, I think he's at least trying to point us back.
Hopefully
to
that is the same.
But yeah, I hope that is the sandwich.
For sure.
I'm really excited though about a picture that I took recently. It has fairies in it.
Yes.
Isn't that fascinating?
Can I see? Can I see?
That little,
Oh, that's not the picture. Okay. I thought you made it your back.
That's what I thought too. I was like, I don't see fairies. You're weird. Are you okay?
It was that illustrated, that like 25-minute
It
illustration.
was a
Oh.
bit of a story,
That
yeah,
was-
certainly.
On the
It
topic
was
of
good.
giving him a chance to kind of defend himself, I did appreciate, I don't remember which one, it was one of the more recent ones where they were talking about the people in the same city that had we're going to do a protest at this church, and they sat down and they talked.
Yeah.
And how that conversation
Yes.
went.
Yeah.
It's a very similar conversation to some of the things that they're talking about here. So
Yeah.
you get a little bit of his reaction at that point in time to that,
Yeah.
that type of conversation. But
Right.
you'd hope it may have changed a little bit.
I hope so.
So 6 weeks is
So
getting closer.
we'll reconvene at some. Well, we'll have the opportunity to reconvene at some point when it's done. All right.
Cool.
Thanks for organizing.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
Thanks for
guys.
chatting, everybody.
I think that's the one that's like, I want to talk. I think I'm the one that's maybe just like, oh,
We've been
fun.
texting about
Yeah, I was like, oh,
various things, but.
thank
All
you.
right, now we gotta
Thank
leave
you
because
for-
worship practice. But
Yeah.
I gotta go to.
good work, everybody.
Thank
Amen.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Break.
you guys. Thanks, Ariel. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Looking forward to more.
Remember that